All right, welcome back to CS170 fall session. Now we're picking up with chapter 17, which we start to lay out some of the basics for JavaScript. As you recall, we're looking at this as basically the stuff for their second exam of the semester. So you're probably still preparing for the first exam, but this will start to kick things off. So you can maybe look at this video now and then come back to it a little bit later, and be in a better mindset after you get through the first exam. So we're not going to actually do quite the programming part yet. This is just really kind of introducing some of the basic ideas. Okay, so for those of you that haven't been exposed to much on the computing side of things from a development standpoint or a programming standpoint, I'll try to kind of hit on some of these things. So, you've been doing HTML up until now. So what is HTML? HTML is about basically presenting the information, right, on your browser. It could be on your desktop, could be on your phone or whatever, but you have a browser and you have information to present. It could be text, it could be video, it could be pictures, it could be sound, whatever, right? There's all kinds of stuff that you can run through the browser, right? And how you present that information, like the colors, like the links to other pages, how you want to make it so as if it's quote unquote efficient for web crawlers to be able to find your page or understand what your page is about. Like all of that falls under HTML. Now, there's other things that people do on the browser, right? There could be things that allow you to type stuff in, like a form or something, right? So you do any number of things online, right? Maybe you're buying something, maybe you're using a form to capture information, and let's say collect information about a group of people, your customers or whatever, right? So that's where you step into JavaScript. So JavaScript will help you. And the last lecture, we were talking about like algorithms. And we had the flow charts, and in your flow chart, you had your input, right? So for example, we did the flow chart to do the validation on, or the authentication and validation on your login to Facebook, let's say. So you have to capture the information, right? And this is where JavaScript will come in, right? And it'll play out in your assignments too. So you can think of JavaScript as essentially like your calculations, capturing information and calculation, versus HTML, which is basically providing you all kinds of stuff in whatever formatting you want, whether it's text, video, pictures, and whatnot. So that's really where JavaScript comes in. And then you have all these different concepts here. I'm going to walk through it, but this is your intro here, okay? So I think I mentioned it before also when you were looking at your HTML, where does the JavaScript go, right? So similar to like when we were looking at the CSS stuff, where you can have stuff inline, or you can have your CSS up top in the head, right? Whether it's like actually in the head itself, or it could be pulling in from a CSS file, okay? So in that manner, it's kind of similar, where you can have like your script, your JavaScript. Basically, you see these tags here for your script. You can have that in the body, and you can also have that up top. And there's a similar type of thinking here on why you might put some scripts up here at the top, okay? Number one, you put stuff in the body, it's kind of mixed in with your other HTML, and it's like all over the place, right? And maybe you can find it if you do some search and whatnot, but if you're using a function multiple times at different places, you have a very large page, whatever it is, it tends to be better organized when you start to put your code up in the script, up in the head, I should say, and then you access it from within the body, right? And we'll go into a little bit more later on, but there's this idea of like functions. So you would define these functions let's say you have a function to calculate 1 + 1, whatever it is, right? Adding a couple of numbers together. You don't want to have to declare that in different places down at the body, but you could declare the function in one place, nicely organized up in the head, and then you would just call that function from down in the body somewhere else, okay? And don't worry about if you don't understand what a function is for now. We'll get into that, okay? All right, so there's a couple of basic concepts, and we're just laying all that out. So we're not actually doing any coding just yet, right? Just kind of understanding a few different concepts when it comes to programming in general, right? And then some of it's more specific to JavaScript, okay? So this part, basically, a program is a list of statements, right? So you remember your algorithm. You define your algorithm, and going back to the recipe analogy, you have all these different steps, right? You go and get the information, your input, right? And you're going to do some sort of calculation, and then out comes something, right? Similar to like the recipe. I went to the refrigerator, got the ingredients, I mixed them together or did whatever else I had to prepare, maybe put in the oven, and then baked it, and then out came a cake as your finished product, right? So that's what a program does. A program basically is a sequence of statements that allow the computer to do something. It could be a transformation of like whatever you put in. It could be a calculation, whatever it is. And there's this little bit of a thing here it's just a convention. I shouldn't say it's not really a convention. It's more like a rule that you should do. So every statement, you should finish it up with a semicolon like that, just to kind of say, we're done with that statement. Okay. And it's case sensitive, right? And it's really where the case sensitive aspect comes in is really when you name your variables. Okay. So it gets to be something that you want to pay attention to, right? And don't worry, I'll tell you what a variable is in a second. But that's really kind of what trips people up a bit in terms of being case sensitive, right? So I'll talk a little bit about it, but this is one thing to note, okay? And then, like I was saying before, syntax versus convention. Some things, like it's just generally like what people do to make code maybe more readable, easier to debug or easier to make changes, easier to understand or follow. Those generally fall under stuff like convention. If you do it different ways, maybe you line everything up in one line or whatever, it's maybe hard to read, but it doesn't break the code, right? So when you do something wrong on the syntax side, it does break the code. That means your web page won't come up or it won't behave properly, okay? So that's the difference between looking at something as syntax versus a convention, okay? All right, so what is a variable? I like to look at a variable as sort of like a bucket that holds a value, right? So I define a bucket for the computer, right? They kind of use these little Tupperware boxes. And whatever is in that bucket is basically holding that value, right? So let's say I have a little bucket or variable that stores the value for total amount, right? So maybe I'm, taking a whole bunch of numbers and putting them all together, and I want to store the value of that somewhere. So I create a variable called total amount, and I put that amount into that variable. Okay. So that's what a variable might be, and we'll have some more examples of that in a second. Okay. And so these are some general rules on the syntax here. So you want to start a variable with a letter, right? And then you can put any sequence of letters and numbers after that. You could also have an underscore or a dollar sign, okay? But you have to start it with a letter first, right? And then you can't have spaces, right? So it has to be all together, okay? And then So with this is syntax. If you don't do this right, then the program doesn't work, right? From a convention standpoint, you want to do these type of things. That makes the variables easier to read, easier for people to understand what you're trying to do with the variable. So you want to try to be descriptive. This is just a convention. You start the first letter as lowercase, and you can do something like this, where every time you change the word, you make it a capital, right? And so that convention is called camel case, right? So every time you change the word, you put in as a capital letter, so then people can kind of understand that it's actually two words put together, right? Because you can't have spaces in a variable, okay? So take a look at this. You can, quickly try to understand whether these are legal or illegal, okay? So look at it quickly. You don't have to think too hard about it. I'm going to show you the answer in a second. But just think about the rules that I just mentioned over here, and then apply that to here. And you can tell me which of these are valid variables, okay? So here we go, right? Why is this legal? Why is this illegal, right? So you see this number 3 starting off there. You can see the symbol using a pound sign. That's not legal. And then you can see a space here between the week and the day, okay? All right, so here's another convention. Very easy, you can define a variable to be some single letter like this, right? So E and F, right? And area, okay? So again, have a think, what do you think would be a better variable name than E and F or whatever? Okay, well, here we go. There's an answer for that. So you might want to call E like the height, right? And then you want to call this the width, right? And then the area is area, okay? So that seems a little bit more meaningful than me telling you, oh, we have E times F. You might be thinking, well, what the heck is E and what the heck is F, right? But if I tell you I have height times width, that kind of makes more sense. And you say, oh, I'm trying to calculate the area here, okay? But now that you have that, do you think there's something else that we can do more to make it even more meaningful, right? Let's say I actually have a whole bunch of different calculations or different different shapes that I want to calculate the area for, okay? Then you get into this, right? So let's say if I have multiple ones, then you can say, well, I have a blue square or blue rectangle, I should say. So then I would call this blue height, blue width, and then blue area. Okay, now this is a case where they put in the underscore between the blue and the height. That's another convention. It saves a little bit of space when you use the camel case. So if I did the camel case way, then you would just have the blue, and instead of having the underscore here, you would have a capital H for height, and then blue, and then without the underscore there, you would have a capital W. And then same thing for the blue area, okay? So this basically just gets a little bit more specific and allows people to understand a bit more what you're referring to and what you're trying to do with these variables, okay? There's this thing called var to declare these variables, okay? So again, these little Tupperware things. So you declare in JavaScript, you would say var, and then you would say, in this case, age, and then a semicolon to finish that statement. And likewise, you can do the same thing for area, and you can do the same thing for radius, okay? A little bit of a shortcut here is to do something like this. You can do a var, and then you can put one variable separated by another, by a comma, and then put in another variable. So you can declare them all in one line like this. So you can declare area and radius, right? So what happens when you declare a variable? You declare a variable, it basically tells the computer to reserve, in this case, a memory location, age, to store whatever value that you want to put in there, right? So that's what it does. It tells the program, I have a bucket or a variable called age, and I have another variable called area and radius. Okay, so that's what happens when you're declaring a variable. You're reserving that for the computer or the program to use later on. All right, so there's this idea of data types, right? So I declared a variable here. And you can probably infer from looking at this that age is probably a number. Same thing with the area and same thing with the radius, okay? So a number is like telling you what type of variable it is, okay? But I can also store words or strings inside of these things too, right? So the first type a variable can be is a number, right? The second type it could be is a string. And all that means is it just stores a word or a letter or something like that. And then the third thing you can do is you can store a Boolean. A Boolean basically evaluates to true or false, okay? So how do you assign a value to a variable, okay? So this is what you can do here, right? You can do the declaration. Remember the declaration I was talking about here. And then you can use this equal sign, just one equal sign. And that means to assign something. Notice the camel case here for tax rate. And then you use the equal to do assignment. And then I'm assigning it a number here, right? By doing it this way, oops, I shouldn't have done that. Let me flip that back. By doing it this way, the computer can tell that this is a number. Okay, if you wanted to assign this as a string, you would put some quotes around it. Okay. And then a second variable, balance due equals to 0. And you do an equal again to assign it, right? So now you have a variable declared. Now you have some values assigned to it. Okay. Now note this part here at the bottom. You can do the declaration and assignment all in one line, right? So now I'm doing the balance due, I'm declaring it. And right at the same time I'm declaring it, I can do an assignment equals to 0, right? And likewise, like we did before, you can actually declare the variable and assign it all in one line, multiple variables, multiple assignments, right? So tax rate equals to 0.088 and balance due equals to 0. So, you know, you would assign things as numbers, right? So we don't think of like 33% typically when we're doing calculations, right? So we would look at it as 0.33, okay? So you just think about it when you punch a number, let's say into a calculator or something, right? You know, you want to put in like whatever number is and then times, let's say in this case, 0.33, okay? And then same thing on the things like currency, right? Currency is something that we would like add a dollar to it from a formatting perspective later, but the actual calculation, it's going to be treated as 10 point, in this case, 10.89, okay? And likewise, you don't put commas in there. Commas is more for display purpose. So we'll put in like 3 spots and a comma, 3 spots and a comma, but that's more for people to look at this on a screen. From a computing standpoint, it's just one with these 6 zeros after it, okay? And likewise for this 1599, okay? All right, so this talks about strings. So remember I was saying put in the quotes. So this could be double quote or single quote, but you just have to make sure they match, right? So you can't have like a double quote here and then a single quote over here, okay? So that's what this is saying here, number 2, right? Single quote or double quotes, okay? And then if you, and that works out kind of well if you want to be able to, you know, put in some nesting of different things, okay? So one thing, you remember the escape character. So you don't want it to get confused by having the single quote in here. This backslash, it would be an escape so that it will show guide to B and B's with the single quote if you were to print this out, okay? And then if you just want an empty string with no characters, you just put like the double quotes next to each other, okay? And similar to numbers, you can initialize the strings at declaration, okay? Okay, so these are like basically performing mathematical operations, right? They're calling arithmetic operations, right? So if you want to take 2 variables or 2 numbers and do something with them, in this case, it could be addition, multiplication, subtraction, or division, you would use these symbols to do that. Okay, so for example, you have like the multiplication A times B, you would have that. Okay, the mod, you might remember a little bit of that from like our numeric conversions, is basically the percentage operator, right? So you have these for your standard ones, and then another common one is the mod operator, which is the percentage sign. Right, and you just take the 2 numbers and divide it, and then whatever is the remainder, that's the output from this mod function, okay? And you might remember this from your, I guess, what is it, high school math or middle school math, PEMDAS, right? So that basically means, you know, your order of operations. When you have a more complex math function, it goes through like this sequence of ordering from left to right. So you would start off with whatever is inside the parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, right? In that order, right? So if you're confused, like looking at like a complex formula and you don't know what's the order, it's following the PEMDAS rule, okay? Just like what you did in middle school or high school math. Okay, all right, so that's what we have for this lecture. This hopefully gives you a quick intro. What's the variable? How do you declare variables? How do you assign variables? What's the naming conventions that we follow for variables? And how do we do some basic math operations? Okay, we're gonna pick up with these others in a future lecture on the right-hand side. All of these over here, we'll pick them up in another lecture. Okay, all right, thank you.